Okay, so C.S. Lewis, chapter. Now, the last time we were with me, we looked at the Bishop, which is chapter 5. I think we did, and we talked about Protestant liberalism. Does that ring a bell? Classical liberalism? We didn't? Yay or nay? No, this would have been a couple of weeks ago. This would have been. Well, I think John. Yeah, you know what? Thank you, Betty. John. The last time you were with me, we just did chapters 1, 2, and 3. And 4, and then we just talked about the story itself, some of the characters, and we talked about heaven and hell in the Scriptures. John was with us for 2 weeks, and John addressed the Bishop. The Bishop is, what C.S. Lewis is dealing with is what we call classical or Protestant liberalism. And it shows up theologically in all the seminaries in the middle 1800s. In Europe, by the early 1900s, it's in all the seminaries inside the United States. And so Lewis writes in the middle of the 1900s, 20th century, and so he's addressing that theological understanding, and the Bishop represents that theological understanding. Lewis is obviously taking a more historical, and I'm going to use the word orthodox, a more historical, orthodox stance on heaven, on hell, things of that, on time, and what's God's activity in the world, human response to that. And so what you have in chapter 5 with the Bishop is a conversation that would have happened, or could have easily have happened in the middle 1900s, when you've got two different theological understanding. One, the Bishop represents the classical liberal, and that's what it's called, classical liberalism. And Lewis is more of a neo-orthodox. So Karl Barth, you've heard that name before, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, they're all neo-orthodox theologians. And Lewis would be inside of that line as well. So that's where chapter 5 is addressing. And I think you have the slides on 5. Just a couple of things that are really important there. Coming out of classical liberalism, you have an understanding that salvation is more universal in its understanding, and I don't mean universal as if everybody can be saved, but universal as in everybody's going to be saved regardless. You have the rise or the rediscover of what they call the Imago Dei, which is that people are created in the image of God. And that gets, under classical liberalism, that gets kind of moved to a place where because you have, created in the image of God, then you're really not sinful as a person. You just have to unlock your godness, and salvation is the part of that unlocking process. And Jesus is the example of that. What's stressed in classical liberalism is Jesus not so much as divine as Jesus as a person. And the idea is that if everybody lives under God's grace, say, I'm making up the numbers, but 30%, Jesus lived 100% under God's grace. And so he's our example, not so much Savior. What is highlighted inside of classical liberalism is, someone's ethics, how they live their life over necessarily what they believe, doctrine. And then what's the primary authority for a person is their own personal experience over, say, Scripture as an authority or tradition or some of the others. But so you have, and you can see some of that in the conversation with the Bishop, where the Bishop talks about how his own views, it really doesn't matter, to some degree it doesn't matter what the views are, as long as he's just sincere and he's honest with his views. That is considered faithfulness, as opposed to necessarily what you believe and then how you act out of that. What comes out of Protestant liberalism, classical liberalism, is the rise of the social gospel. And on so many levels, the social gospel is a good thing, because what it did, a light would be they would shine a light on what you do in the world is important. It's not just what you believe. And social gospel stressed what you do in the world, how you live out your faith. You also have a rise in theological circles of what is experiential theology, feminist theology, liberation theology, process theology. I mean, there's a number of these that come out of these that late 1800s, early 1900s. And many of the Protestant liberal theologians wanted, they applied higher criticism to the Bible, and one of the net effects out of that was that anything that was of myth or miracle or something that's not scientific, they wanted to sort of exit that out of the Bible. So you see, that's where you see that'll give you some insight into understanding some of the conversation between the bishop and I think the guy's name is Lim or Dick. I can't remember what his Dick. Yeah, what so the goal for most inside of a Protestant liberal or classical liberal, the goal is sincerity. If you can just be sincere, then that is considered to be, faithfulness. And the only problem is that you can be sincere about a bunch of things. I mean, you know what sincerity is? Just you're not split on it. I can be sincere and want to knock somebody out. Right? And that's not necessary. So there's got some flaws to it. And some of these are pointed out inside the text. But the one I want us to kind of, got some blank faces, so we can stay here if you want. I mean, this is, I'm trying to go as fast as I can through that whole Protestant liberal, but it's just two different schools of thoughts. One of them approaches it from an experience base. The other one approaches it from a more historical or traditional understanding, interpretation of Scripture. But they start in two different places and they end in two different places. And it's just a totally different, it's a totally different way of looking and approaching and applying your faith. And I think it's got a lot of flaws to it. And I don't think it holds, it doesn't pass the test of tradition. To me, it doesn't pass the test of Scripture. And, all of us have our own experiences, and we're not trying to highlight one experience over another. But just because somebody has their own experience, what that really means is that you have your own experience. But you can have your own experience and it not necessarily be something that could be good. My children have their own experiences. Okay, and they will tell me, Dad, you just don't understand. And what they're at is the reason I don't understand is because I'm not in their life. I understand that, but just because I'm not in their, I'm not them. I'm not Connor. I'm not Caroline. Doesn't negate the fact that there are some things that are just right and wrong. And you can have an experience, and it can be your own experience, and you can be. We could all be very sincere in that. But there are some things, when someone becomes a Christian, the New Testament language is they become ushered in, or they become invited into the kingdom of God. But the kingdom of God has its own set of rules, its own set of life. It has its own ethical code, its moral code. It's got its own understanding of lordship, its own understanding of belief and belief system. But in order to do that, and it uses the word citizens, if you want to be a citizen inside the kingdom of heaven, you live according to their rules. You can't say I'm going to be a citizen of heaven and make my own rules. Just logically, you're not then a citizen of heaven. Now, you can also back that up in Scripture. And classical liberalism sort of dances back and forth between all of that. That's what you'll get in first year history of theological thought at seminary. So it's all right if you got a little glazed over. I had a little glazed over myself when I was studying that. And you can devote a whole semester to it, and it's if you like I mean, if you like the history of thought, the history of Christian thought, then see me afterwards. I'll be happy to give you a bunch of books on that. And but if you're just kind of smiling, saying, "All right, Shane, move it along," then I'm going to be obedient and move it along. Because when we get to chapter 6, this I think is, I mentioned this on Sunday. I've read C.S. Lewis, The Great Divorce, I don't know how many times. It's a number of times. And normally on chapter 6, I just sort of just kind of went through it like it wasn't that important. But the more I reflect on chapter 6, the more I think that it's actually really important for us. It's a very short chapter. Just to kind of refresh you on what takes place inside the chapter, you've got the narrator moves from watching the bishop and Dick have their conversation. I think this is when the lions, he hears the lions coming, playing the waterfall. And then he sees a guy that's under this big old tree, and the guy's trying to pick up some apples. And he wants to put the apples in his pocket. And it's the same guy they met on the bus that wants to take the apples back down to hell and sell them. And what's interesting to me is that, he tries to pick up a big apple, that doesn't work, and then he picks a little bit smaller, and eventually he finds the tiniest of apples, and he's able to put that in his pocket. And the moment he does that, the waterfall that looks like it's a crucifixion, I don't know if you caught that in the imagery, yells out, "Stop, you fool, stay here and eat." And the idea is that if you eat the apple here, you will become whole enough to be able to live inside the town of heaven. Now, remember, they got off the bus from the town of hell. They made it to the outskirts of the town of heaven. But nobody is fit enough to be able to stay inside of even the outskirts of the town of heaven. But their goal is not to just stay on the city limits or on the town limits. The goal is to get them up into the mountaintop, right? I mean, that's what shows up in the conversations throughout the chapters. And this guy is just on the outskirts of the town, and he's picking up the fruit. And he wants to take it back to hell and sell them. What's interesting to me, and this is where, remember, we're also looking for commonalities. Where does our life match up with some of the characters in the text? And if so, what can we draw from our own life and make adjustments or whatever they may be? Why doesn't he stay? If the message is stay here, and if you stay here, you won't need to go back and try to sell it. You'll have everything that you want here. Just stay and eat, and you'll be whole enough. And yet he chooses not to do that. Now, here's what I think is interesting. So many people, even inside the church, only want just enough of Jesus to make them feel better. I just want one little apple, because if I can just get a little apple, then that's my security net, that's my insurance card, that's my safety net, my blanket. I want only enough to where either I don't get in trouble, or maybe my anxiety goes down, or I just want just enough to not be in trouble. When that happens, we're like the person in the text. When the message from the waterfall is, stay here and eat, and you'll be whole, and yet he chooses to leave. Why? Well, it could be, all right. So the good answer could be it's too hard. And in the story it does say, and listen, being a Christian, it's not for the faint of heart. All right, it's not. I mean, what's required of the Christian is there are other religions to follow other than Christianity that are easier. All right, so if you just want to be a religious person, that's fine. But there are other. I could. There are other world religions. I'd just pick one. All right. Some of them are. It doesn't have the same moral code. And doesn't. The teachings of Jesus. Oh my. Jesus doesn't say, well, just pick up your cross whenever you want to, whenever it's convenient. If it's, maybe one day a week, and, it's all going to be okay. Sure. I mean, what sits behind all of this is well, right. I mean, what we're going to get to, particularly you'll see it in chapter 7, is what's behind all of this is the issue around the heart. All of these can be boiled down. I mean, it might be a certain issue like this guy, he wants to take the fruit back down. When we get to chapter 7, this cynical, hard-bitten type guy, ghost, I mean, he's really just apathetic. And so we're going to talk about why apathy is so difficult. And but the issue behind all of that is the issue of the heart, or the will, whatever word you want to use to describe that. I mean, I think that's okay. But what sits with this guy in chapter 6 is, and my observations in ministry is, we all have a lot in common with chapter 6. We only want just enough. But I want enough to where maybe I remember the first time someone brought this issue up to me. Said, Shane, when you're driving to Atlanta, how fast do you drive? And I said, well, about 8 miles an hour over the speed limit. And he said, why is that? He said, because that's just enough where you won't get a ticket. And I thought, oh, I didn't hear him correctly. So, that's think of. Started out how? Well, sure. I mean, behind all this sits the whole Genesis 3 issue of the heart. I mean, if you look at the book of Genesis, I mean that never goes away, and it's this constant. I mean, what to me the real battleground inside the life of a person when it comes to following Christ has ultimately to do with surrendering. All right, and which is a hard issue. Can you relinquish? Who's going to be the headwinds of your life, and then orient your life around. So if it is surrendering to God fully, then everything is directed around that. I mean, how you're going to live your life. What your goal is of what dictates your thoughts. How you're going to treat people, how you're going to treat yourself, all those are in play. Now, okay, to starting out, it can be that we grow into something. So there is, and I think you can find a ton of evidence inside the Scriptures that there is a growth process where we are learning more and we are developing more and walking in our faith and maturing. But at least the initial decisions always have to be addressed, because if you're not going to win that first question, which is the battle of the heart or the battle of the will, then you're not going to do, or I'm not going to do the application of that. I mean that's just true. I mean, I can't say, Sue, I love you, and I really, I really do love you, and I don't, and then at some point when asked to follow through on loving you, well, that decision's already made. At some point, it'll rub. I mean, it'll already happen. And but what's required of us is, it's everything. I mean, it's everything. I mean, your whole life is oriented. I mean, the very beginning, how did Jesus begin his sermons? Mark chapter, when we find him in the Gospels, when he preaches, what does he say? Stand for the reading of the Scripture? No, probably not. What is that?
The kingdom of heaven is at hand.
Then what? Repent and believe. That's submission. And it is, I'll be the first to admit, submission is hard. And if you're used to being in control, or being, the leader or whatever it is, it's that much harder. And, but yet the requirement doesn't change, regardless who it is. And it is, which is why when Jesus starts to deal with different levels of who is in control inside the society, whether it be around religion or theology, you've got the Pharisees, Sadducees, whether it be because we have those. We have people who are educated, people who are not. So in our society, which one is normally held in higher esteem? Normally held one that makes more of the decisions, right? Educated over, what are they? Educated over uneducated, rich over poor, athletic over not. I mean, just in our society, not athletic. I mean, think about what we value. I mean, just go through the grocery store and see who's on the magazine covers. That'll tell you what we value as a society. Now, whether or not you agree or not, I mean, what are we, 40 people here? I mean, out of compared to how many billion in the world? I mean, so, we're the minority, all right? But I mean, that'll tell you what we value inside of our society. And so, so we've got these levels of authority, or levels of just these levels of how we see people. But Jesus sort of addresses all of them at some point. And he puts his finger on the issue, right? The people who are supposed to know, Pharisees, you don't see. Have you ever, go back and look in the Gospels how many times he talks about the Pharisees not seeing the kingdom of God. They're supposed to see it. All right? Wealthy folks, what does he say? Yeah, I mean, what is the issue? The issue has to do with them. What's their biggest stumbling block? It's what exactly right. Or to some degree, be able to, right. People of prominence, you got that. People of power. I mean, they're there in the Gospels, and I think it's chapter 6. We like just enough, and just enough for one person might look different than just enough for another, but it doesn't change the fact.
It's like the 7 deadly sins.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's.
We didn't hear what she said.
She said it's like the 7 deadly sins. Yeah, you see all 7 in the story, and we've dealt with pride. We've coming up. You'll deal with anger in a little bit. We've got lust coming up, and you definitely got apathy. So let's segue into chapter 7. Now we get into chapter 7. This is where C.S. Lewis has a conversation to where this guy's behind him, and it's the hard-bitten guy, or I call him the cynical ghost, and he's the one that talks about how behind it all is management or a group or whoever it is, and their role is to entertain, or they're responsible for everything. And the issue there, going back to the 7 deadly sins, is apathy. Laziness is not the right translation in the 7 deadly sins. Apathy is the real issue. And the reason why apathy can, or sloth, that's the medieval word, the reason why that can be so difficult for us. I mean, actually, the Greek word for sloth or apathy actually means no care. You don't care at all. And what's the opposite of love? No, it's not. The opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is no care, not caring. I mean, actually, the line between love and hate is really thin, because what it is that the outcome is different, and so there's a level of frustration with the outcome, but hate has a ton of passion assigned to it. And so, I mean, just like love has a ton of passion assigned to it, apathy has zero passion. You just don't care. And inside relationships, when you go talk to a therapist inside of relationships, if the words that are using are hate, they can work with that. They can't work when we just don't care, and I'm not even trying. That's the difference, and that's the reason why it can be so difficult. And yet what we find in the Christian life is that we're not to just be these aimless corks just floating in the ocean without any care. I mean, the idea is that, talking about repent and believe, live inside the kingdom of heaven, I mean, it comes with a purpose, and it comes with action. And people who are apathetic, it just doesn't matter. They don't care. And it can be incredibly, it can be incredibly destructive. Love requires a decision, and which then goes back to the matter of your will or your heart. To be apathetic is there's no decision that ever needs to be made, or it's someone else's decision, like it is for the guy in the text, because it really doesn't matter. And so you got this discourse that goes on between the narrator and the cynical ghost, and the narrator says, "Well, why don't you stay up here in heaven?" It doesn't matter. Heaven, hell, it's no big deal. Same town, different day, same groups running it. It's their decision to provide entertainment. It's their decision to run this, and they're all doing it anyway. So just kind of sit around and do whatever. It's that's what you have in chapter 7. I want to talk. There's 3 levels in my mind of apathy, and one of them is, and this is not in the slides, so one of them is that where we have, and this is where it can be difficult for us as Christians, is to get to a place where mentally we want to be apathetic, which means when it comes to our mind. And now you think about in the New Testament, how many times in the New Testament does it talk about the mind as being the means by which brings about transformation or bring about renewal? Romans actually is probably the most common one, by the renewing of your mind. Live your life as a worthy sacrifice. And so you got this idea of mentally always wanting to move, always wanting to grow, to take in, so that your mind is not slothful. And yet, when we get to the point to where we get to the point where we are not willing to learn, even about ourselves, about God, or about other people, at some point you can cross that level and begin down a path. Now, it's not quick, but you can begin down a path where we just become apathetic with our mind. I remember talking to one guy one time, and we're going to break right after this because I know some have to leave, where we were talking about some things, and I remember the person saying, all right, stop, preacher. Let's not have any more conversations about any of this. And I said, okay. And he said, I've already worked out what I want it to be. And, and he was at a certain age, said, I don't want to learn anything else yet, because if I do, that might mean I might have to change my life. And so that's an example. Now, this doesn't mean if you miss a Bible study, you're going to be moved down to the town of hell. If that's the case, I'm already down there. I've missed a couple. So, but there is this idea of obviously wanting to grow mentally. Morally is another one, and you see that so often in actual sins that we commit. And the issue for so many folks is where we have an idea with what we believe. So, like, say, if we say, theologically, we believe these things, all right? And then to apply those out into our life or into our world requires some level of application, right? Okay? But where we can become apathetic morally is just say, well, I've got all these down right, and this is all good, but I'm not going to do the work that is needed to act on what I believe. This can be a level of moral sloth. For instance, if you believe that God loves all people, right? Okay, then and that God wants to save the entire cosmos. That's what it says in the Scriptures. Actually, use that word cosmos. John 3:16, the world, cosmos. All right, so that's everything in creation. That God wants to redeem creation, then and we participate with that, then how we live our life should be in some level of application to where that manifests itself. Right? So if we're not willing to do that, then why? Could be, yeah, absolutely. And she said we could become morally apathetic, and I would agree with that. If you believe that, drug abuse is bad. All right. I mean, I'm just picking some low-hanging fruit. Well, it's one thing just to say yes, preach a sermon on it, Shane. It's bad. All right, I could do that. I just did it. Drug abuse is bad. All right, so we don't want to do that. All right, so we can do that, and we could do that for 52 Sundays out of the year. How much change do you think that'll make a difference inside the world? Probably not much. So then what would be required? For us to take our theology and act on it and maybe work in areas that can either help people that are trapped in addictions. And there's a thousand different ways how that would play it out. But the idea to be able to say, well, yes, this is not good. We do not like this. Yes, we're going to stand and say, we do not like this, and then not follow through on it. How is that not, in some form, a level of, well, I just don't really care?
Sometimes you feel like that you're just insignificant and
Sure.
not be able to make a change.
Mm-hmm.
Beating your head against the wall.
Well, and I hear that, and trust me, I'm very familiar with that. All right. I mean, there's a lot of. I mean, there's not every sermon I preach ends in how I want it. Not every time we do something ends in what I would love to see happen in the world. Not every conversation I have with people ends up with happy, happy, joy, joy. Not every prayer I pray ends up with with wholeness. So we're going to break here and we're going to come back because I want to be true to the time. But I'm going to here Shane is, but Shane's also going to step out for a minute, and he's going to, sorry, Becky, he's going to take a look at his life and analyze himself. All right? And so you are looking at yourself, but the idea is that you're looking at yourself for that moment because you want to know what it is that's making you tick, because you want something other than what it currently is. That's what self-reflection, that's the reason why that can be so powerful in our life. And now it's painful, okay? I mean, no one likes to, sit and say, all right, Shane's going to be the subject this morning for Shane's case study, Nobody likes that, because we have to then put our finger on the issues for why we do what we do. If you take anger normally is a response to something, right? Something happens, you don't like it, and so you choose a decision of response that is destructive, right? Seldom, when we get angry and we act in anger, seldom is that real, whatever it is that triggered that response, seldom is that the real issue. The real issue is normally deeper. Does that make sense? Sorry, Gene, you're close to table 1, seat 1, so you're right in my line of sight. Sandy's happy that you're there, so I'll talk to her. If Gene says something, Gene could say, Shane, you're a terrible whatever, all right? And I would want to respond in anger. The issue is not what she said. The reason why I would want to respond in anger is because it's touching a part of me at how I see myself. Does that make sense? And so reflection wants to get past that initial whatever it is to get at the real issue. And so what this, the reason why I think chapter 8 is just so wonderful to read is the Spirit is helping the person, helping the ghost look inward more so than outward. If you could for a moment just get your mind off the fact of how you think of your appearance, that I'm using the story, what she's dealing with in the story, and just see something larger, it would really make all the difference in the world. Happiness in life, part of the wholeness or the salvation process has to deal with how you see yourself. Now, to use a different discipline or a different word, maybe a therapy word, we use esteem. Most of us are comfortable with that word. So part of what I think takes place when people are made whole in Christ is how they see themselves changes. Their esteem changes. Well, an initial part of that in the healing process is seeing yourself differently. And so we talk about low self-esteem as someone who doesn't see, they see themselves beneath what it should be. If we on the other end of that would be a high self-esteem. That's probably not the right word, but an unhealthy self-esteem. That's where we get pride and things of that from. It's where you see yourself inflated, and those seems to, we have a tendency to kind of move back and forth from I'm less than or I'm more than, and both of them are just the opposite sides of the same coin. What the New Testament talks about is when it comes to identity, how you see yourself, God is very much concerned with that. So much so that how you see yourself becomes the lens by which you are to see and love other people. And I think we do a terrible job with that from the teaching side of the church. When we talk about love, often the way we talk about love is codependent or codependency. So you got to go out and love all these people. Jesus is counting on you to do it. So we're mixing a little guilt there too. And the way you do it is you got to sacrifice yourself, and you just got to go and love them and care for them. And doesn't matter what your needs are, doesn't matter what's going on with you, you just got to go and do it. And we hear sermons like that. And what the net effect is that, well, my life really doesn't matter what's most important is all these other people that need to be loved. Well, that's half true. There are people that need to be loved. And the way you love other people is first by loving yourself holistically in a healthy way. If you really want to read some good stuff on this, it's a guy by the name of Bernard of Clairvaux. He's a French theologian, 1300s or something. He talks about these 4 levels of love, and it's really fantastic. And he says the best way for you to love somebody else, and really it's an act of your faith on how you love God, is you love yourself and become the best self you can be. That will be the best gift that you give to everybody else. It's fantastic. I mean, and he's so on point. And but we just don't teach that in a just I'm critiquing my own group. Okay, so I mean we could do a better job of teaching that. And I understand we want to stress going out and serving and mission and all that, but at some point that the collateral damage that could come from that can be unfortunate. But learning to love, and I mean, reading why Sabbath. Why do you think Sabbath is in the Bible? Right. I mean, who does it renew? Does it renew God? Right. That's exactly right. I mean, so what's the benefit of Sabbath? Who's it benefit? Bingo. Right. I mean, I mean, it's learning to love yourself, and it's learning to have good boundaries. All right? I mean, a healthy person has good boundaries. Okay? And good boundaries is where they don't always say yes and they don't always say no. They know the difference. And they apply them as it should be. And we struggle with it, and particularly in our society today, very, we're horrible with time in and of itself, and that's calendar time. But on top of that, so much of our worth we draw on what we do, performance, or who we are, where we're at on the ladder. We make comparisons all the time. And those things in and of themselves can be okay, but if they become the sole means by which we draw our sense of self-worth, we're going to then oscillate between very low loving self and very unhealthy on the high side loving self. And most people, we'll swing over here when our life gets out of whack, and we just say no to everything. I'm overcommitted, and then we don't do anything for a while, and we think that's the ticket, and then all of a sudden I got to go do something, so then we jump back over here. I mean, is that about accurate? Sure it is. All right, I've been doing this long enough. I know. I do it in my own life. I mean, I've overcommitted. I'm the example of this, that I've overcommitted myself on so many different levels for this fall. I have, and I'm paying the price. And so I mean, it's not just here at the church. I've committed myself in a number of other things outside of the church, and I mean, and I'm for the next couple of months, I'm living with my decisions. No, I am. I mean, it's which means that I've oscillated back to where letting go of a ton of stuff, but this happens. This is real for us. It's not just something in the text, and it can come from a desire to want to do good, but not learning to love and to care for yourself. Then if that's the means by which we're supposed to go and love and care for others, and if that part is unhealthy for a season of our time in our life, then we try to go and love someone else. We're trying to love somebody else from a mirror that's cracked or cloudy. Does that make sense? And so, this is just so fantastic. Could you, for a moment, fix your mind on something that's not yourself and see a wider picture? There's because at some point, and this is how we learn to love ourselves, and this is one of the reasons why I'm a Christian. the value that is given to us by God is not something that we can ever make, create, or earn. It is a gift that is given. And it takes a while for us to grow into that, okay? I get that. All right? It takes a while for that to get inside of our DNA. But when it does, it becomes life. That you are loved by God regardless of how many times you get it right or how many times you get it wrong. That does not change. That doesn't mean you don't have consequences on both sides, but the starting point does not ever change. Which is why there might be one or two books in the New Testament, but I'm not familiar. I have to go back and look at them. But just off top memory, particularly the writings of Paul, it starts first with identity stuff. This is who you are, who you are, who you are. And he's reminding the church now. They're not writing to people that's outside. They're writing to people inside, all right? It's a message for us. You are who you are. You are a child of God, heir, all those things, all right? And then, normally about chapter 3, chapter 4, whatever, he transitions. And then it is, because you are this, now go and act out of that. But it's not the other way around. See, we think holiness is subtraction for us. All right? Subtraction. All right? I don't commit as many sins as somebody over here. And because I don't commit as many sins as this person over here, not Mary Alice, she's a saint, so got to pick on somebody else. That person that's out there, 10 blocks away, whoever that would be, then I'm holier. And that's not it. To the saints at St. Paul, he writes, well, they're not necessarily saintly when it comes to their behavior. Read the book of Corinthians. Oh my. Yeah, exactly right. But, that's how he calls them. That's who they are. And so this is chapter 8's really good. One of the things that Paul writes about in Romans, did you not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear? Now he's talking now, chapter 8 in Romans, you need to understand the flow of the argument in Romans. In first couple of chapters, I think it's through chapter 3, maybe chapter 5, it's that humanity cannot generate their own salvation. And then he gets in the fact that God's remedy to that is Jesus Christ. The righteousness of Jesus Christ then becomes applied to the person. And so they then have His righteousness as their righteousness. That shows up in 6, 5, 6, and 7. Well, you get into chapter 8, it's okay, now what? Well, now that you have this identity that is righteous, now that you have this identity that is holy, don't go back and be a slave. Don't go back to this way of life that says you're only going to be holy by getting it better or doing it better, getting it right more than the next person. It says don't do that. Stay in the identity that God gives you. Stay in who you are as a child of God. So this is a good word for us inside of our society. Our society just runs off on what you do determines who you are, and that's not right. What you do reveals what's on the inside, but what God wants you to do is live out of what's on the inside and stay with that for a while until it starts to just ooze out of you. Maxie Dunham says when we accept this description of our own identity, and that is the identity given by God, the games of position and power and appearance which we play are seen for what they are, silly in the least and destructive in the worst. And an hour hence, and you will not care, and a day hence, and you will actually laugh at it. Y'all still doing good? All right. It's a lot to deal with today, isn't it? Tell you what, I'm going to have to go back to the Gospel of John. We're just like 2 verses or something. So we get to chapter 9, and what I like about chapter 9, obviously it's a eye-opening experience for the narrator. It's where he meets George MacDonald. And the rest of the book, it's the conversation that takes place between George MacDonald and the narrator. And we make the assumption that C.S. Lewis, and I think that would be good. But the reason why I like chapter 9 is because part of what C.S. Lewis is wrestling with is this whole concept of heaven and hell. And here's where you see the purpose of the book. What he tells them is that it's really, you're not here to try to figure out, heaven and hell as much as you're to figure out and observe how people's choices affect their life, and which brings us to the whole concept of revelation. The way revelation works, and this is where it also helps with self-reflection and that whole concept. And I actually made you do that a few minutes ago, where I said get something in your life from the past, and the idea is look back from now, look back on your life even back then, because your perspective has changed. Correct? All right. So say if we pick something out of our 20s, let's just say everybody got an event that all took place in our 20s.
I can't remember.
You can't remember, and well, we'll say 20-ish, a little bit more. But who you are today, you have a different perspective on that. And so when you look back, even look back in faith, well, let me ask it to you this way. How many of you, from forward looking, like say as a little girl or, college, whatever, from early in your life could see the works of God in your life as they were happening as you were getting older? How many? You can see them all?
Oh, no.
Yeah, I've got to see them all. I don't mean just 1 or 2. I mean, you can identify them, on Tuesday, whatever day it was, you saw God's hand this way. No, probably not. I don't think anybody can.
Think of all the walls you hit that you thought this is the end of the world.
Right, okay, that's even better. The walls that you hit that you thought, oh, I'm going to die, and then you realize you didn't. And so, but if you look from here back, you can see certain acts of God in your life that you did not think were them, or you didn't have enough information at that age or maturity or whatever it may be. But when you look back from this perspective, you can see that. That's a lot like Revelation.
I think you're kind of like you mean.
Yeah. Well, you're just ahead of the game. I mean, you're just always, I see you got your Alabama covers on and your little elephant. I mean, so you're just trying to show off. So let me take something to drink here. So good.
I read a book one time, I don't remember what the book was, but it was saying that one of the duties of old age is to look back on
Sure,
your life
sure.
and to help younger people
Right. Oh, absolutely.
by the wisdom
Yeah.
that you gain when you look back and see the hand of God in your life.
In the Old Testament, what's one of the indications of somebody who is wise? Not just age. It's a description of an aged person. Gray hair. That's right. So so those that in the Old Testament, gray hair is considered a symbol of wisdom, and so. Well, exactly right. So, but the idea is that, Gene, to your point, is you've got these life experiences which have also altered your perspective, and so you're looking back. Well, Joseph in Genesis, if you know anything about the Genesis story, there's a couple of times in the book of Genesis. Joseph's life is played out over about 15 chapters, maybe somewhere in that neighborhood. In the book of Genesis, he starts out, he's just a spoiled brat. I mean, he is. There's no way to clean it up. He's just not, he's just not a good brother. And so his older brothers want to love him so much to sell him into slavery. They sort of come to their senses. I mean, they want to throw him in a pit. They end up selling him off. And he goes down, he's in Egypt, and he's there for a while in jail. And and you really, the only time you get any level of understanding inside of Joseph is when he's asked to interpret some dreams. And when he talks about God, is only in the understanding that God has given me the answer to your dream, but you don't get any descriptives about, I'm just sitting here singing in the jail and everything's going to be good and thanks be to God. I mean, you don't get any of that. But later on, of course, he finally rises in the ranks under Pharaoh and becomes the equivalent of like a regional prime minister of sorts. Well, it's not until 45 that he's actually looking back and starting to connect all the dots. Okay? Well, this is years after all this. And he's able to see, I'm convinced he's not able to see the fullness of that until he gets to a certain age or a certain level of understanding. But then he's able to look back and connect all the dots. I mean, I think that's true in people. I know that I've looked back and, I can go back and see people who, like on Sunday, I grew up at Brick David Baptist Church as a young boy. And my 5th grade Sunday school teacher, he's our basketball coach. But he was able to just get a bunch of rowdy boys to pay attention in Sunday school. All right, he could. I don't know how he did it. I wish I could figure that out. But we learned so much, all right? And then when I was in 9th grade, covered up all my actions of insecurity around being arrogant. And my 9th grade English teacher, evidently could see all through that. And there was a couple of times during my 9th grade year where she would hold me after school, and not to say, Shane, you didn't turn your homework in or whatever, but it was to sit down and say, listen up, you're running with the wrong crowd, I'm telling you, and you're better than this. All right, well, it got through. I mean, I blew it off, whatever, what does she know, but I mean, I thought about that, okay? And so when I look, and there's a ton of folks, when I look back on my life, I see people who could see things about myself that I couldn't see, and I can see how God used them to bring me to the person that I am today. Well, that's what's going on in chapter 9 with C.S. Lewis. And so much of it has to do with revelation. Things are revealed, and and that changes how we think. So we see things differently. To be a little like Joseph at time. Now, I'm not going to go through this song just for the sake of time, but "Oh God, our help in ages past," we sang it this past Sunday. The essence of the song is, I go back and I look at all the things in the past, and I see God's faithfulness there. And even though my present tense is not exactly what I want it to be, I still can trust God because He's been faithful here. And if He's been faithful there, then I can also make the assumption, and it'd be a pretty good assumption, that He could also be faithful in the future. But it all comes with this idea of revelation. And the reason why self-reflection is so important is because we look back and see. But if you're not willing to even look back on your own life, then you can't see so many wonderful things that you just didn't see on the first run. Right? You don't see it until you run through a little bit and you look back. I mean, there's a reason why in the Greek, when you read Greek mythology, wisdom is a bird that flies all day long, but you can't see it until the end of the day. That's the concept. You can't see it until you get back and you look at the day of what's taking place. On the front end, it's just hard to do it. So, this is a great chapter to read, and how MacDonald is raising up those type of issues for C.S. Lewis around this issue of being able to see through or see back, and sometimes you're able to identify the real issues that you just couldn't do on the front end. I mean, I can go back and look at things that the decisions that I've made, and the reason why that discipline is so important is I can look back and say, gosh, Shane, you acted this way, and the reason why you acted this way is because this was the real issue. Well, what I want to do then is say, okay, is this still plaguing me? Is this still calling the shots? Is this still something inside of me that needs to be transformed? And if so, then my future actions are dictated about working with God to change this, so that I'm not just reinventing the same issue every single day. Does that make sense? And so this is what he's getting at in chapter 9. One of the famous quotes to me is, "You cannot fully understand the relations of choice and time until you're beyond both, till you're able to get back and look." Then it's where he says, "You're not here to study curiosity, not here to study heaven and hell, but the issue around the choice itself." Betty has already brought this to our attention. He talks about, part of what he's doing in 9 too is he's going and watching. He's just observing. We're about to stop observing all these different ghosts and spirits. And even though there's an issue at stake, like appearance or management or whatever it may be, there's always something underneath. And here's where I think those things underneath can be so destructive if we're not careful. There's always something, and this is where MacDonald is talking about the ghosts. There's always something they insist on keeping, even at the price of misery. And this is true inside of human nature. There's always something they prefer to joy. This is to reality. You see it easily enough in a spoiled child that will sooner miss its play and its supper than say it was sorry and be friends. And age is not a disqualifier here. He goes on to even make it where how one choice where they will choose to not do something or choose to do something, and how that leads to another choice. And that can become a spiraling effect. It says but the time comes on when though the pleasure becomes less and less and the craving fiercer and fiercer. That's real important inside of human nature. And though he or she knows the joy can never come that way, yet he or she prefers to joy the mere fondling of an unpleasable lust and would not have it taken from him. He'll fight to the death to keep it. How true is that? Where even when we know how it's going to end, we will still choose to walk down that path, even if it is pain or destruction. But there may come a day when you can, and this is MacDonald even talking more, but there may come a day when you can do that no longer, that is, move back. And he's referencing in this case, he's referencing the grumbler, you know that, in chapter 9, where it's just, she eventually pops, right? And so he's making this comparison where choice after choice after choice after choice after choice after choice, even when you know how it's going to end, some people will still choose that, and it ends up in pain, lots of pain. It ends up in a fair amount of destruction. James talks about it this way: but one is tempted by one's own desires, being lured and enticed by it. Then see the progression here. When that desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And that sin, when it is fully grown, that gives birth to death. Same concept. One is just a fictitious story. The other one comes from the Bible. So the end game is this. And this is MacDonald talking to C.S. Lewis. There are only two kinds of people in the end. Those who say to God, "Thy will be done." That is the person saying to God, "Thy will be done." And those to whom God says in the end, "Thy will," God to the person, "Now your will be done." All that is in hell choose it. Without self-choice there could be no hell. No soul that seriously and constantly desires joy will ever miss it. Those who seek it find. Those who knock, it will be open. And you have two examples. The flirtatious ghost and also the painter, who started out painting because of the love of God's creation and wanting to edify that, wanted to paint that message, And what happened is choice after choice after choice after choice after choice, to where God wasn't even a part of it, and what the person only cared about was his own creation and what he painted. Those are just two examples of all that about how the choice can lead to another choice and then on down the line. So, lot we covered. I get that. I'm a little gray myself now. It's about time for lunch. We can just retool, right? So, but next week we're going to just we'll slow it down and just look at chapter 11 and chapter 12, and then we'll move into the Gospel of John. Now, for those that are reading, that want to read ahead, do try to do this as best as you can. Read through the entire Gospel, or at least half of it, out loud without stopping. All right, and the reason why is, and we've done this before, it forces you to look at every single word, and so you're actually reading it twice. You're reading it, but then you're also hearing it. And it helps then to see the breaks in the text. It's not bad. Trust me, it'll be okay. But you're able then to, when you read silently, you only read about every 5 words. Seriously. And so it's easy for us. Our mind is taking it all in and going so fast with that. But sometimes we miss the breaks, the paragraph break, because some of our Bibles, what we have in the Scriptures are edits. Biblical editors who, the NIV, every verse is a new paragraph. Well, obviously that's not the case. NRSV, some of them are very long. That might or might not be the case as well. So reading it out loud helps you kind of see where the breaks are. All righty. Go in peace. May the Lord be with you.